You're shopping for a small Mazda SUV. Which one do you choose? Same engines, same interiors, basically the same options all around. One is just a little bit more expensive and a little larger. That's the CX-50 and the CX-30. Compact and subcompact, these two SUVs are loaded with a lot of luxury grade features at these prices, but they also drive and behave like every Mazda we reviewed, which is to say, pretty good. So which one is going to be right for you, and how do you distinguish it when you're actually trying to buy one? Come with me, we'll find out. Mazda now has 5 SUVs. The CX-30 came out for 2020. The CX-50 was new for 2023. And now there's a 70 and a 90, and there's also a 3 and a 5. So how do you determine which is which? Well, the 30 is the smallest, the 50 is slightly bigger. And at these prices, well, they're not that different as you might think. The CX-50 is more than a foot longer than the CX-30, and the wheelbase is extended by about 6.5 inches. That's why the cabin is so much roomier. It's also 2 inches wider, and it rides a few tenths of an inch higher off the ground. But despite all that, it being bigger, the CX-30 has the wider turning radius by about a foot, so not sure how that happened. But the CX-30 is also lighter by between 300 and 400 pounds, and in doing so, you lose a few gallons of fuel, so you can go almost 400 miles on this turbo model and, well, about 80 miles less over here. When you go small at Mazda, you don't lose the style because it looks exactly the same, which is to say, it looks great. You get really slim LED headlights, that nice wide open grille, not a lot of embellishments, just a few bits of chrome here and there, nice creases, beautiful paint quality, especially on this Soul Red. I think that's absolutely worth it as an option, and better than that Zircon Sand, believe it or not. And you look at the turbo model, you're getting 18-inch wheels, 16 inches comes standard in the CX-30. Everything is a bit smaller, of course, as it should be, but it doesn't feel stubby, and it doesn't really look like an economy hatchback at all. A lot of cars in this segment fail, really, truly fail to come across as elegant. The CX-30 wins. All the CX-30's finer traits translate into the CX-50, just with a wider and lower and slightly longer shape. Again, you can recognize it's a Mazda, the grille, slightly different shape there, slightly different shaped headlights. It really does resemble the family tree well, but looks mildly different. And that's how you do a good product portfolio and have all your SUVs look pretty good. They have similar characteristics, but this one, the turbo with the 20-inch wheels, two-tone, that looks especially good. And the back taillights, especially how they're U-shaped instead of circular, I think that also has a very distinctive look among really any SUV out there. From every angle, this one, just with all the added inches, it just looks and feels better to me. And truly, I think it's worth the extra price. This will be easy to remember because they share the exact same powertrains. 6-speed automatic transmission and all-wheel drive as standard. 2.5-liter inline-4 naturally aspirated is the standard engine. Oddly enough, the tune on the CX-30 gives it mildly more horsepower than the CX-50. And if you step up to the turbocharged version, the CX-50 has a little bit more horsepower, 256 in total, and both have 320 pound-feet of torque when running on premium. That's pretty darn good. Now the fuel economy, CX-30 being lighter, it definitely is better, especially with the naturally aspirated engine hitting over 30 mpg. Fuel economy could be better, but there's also no hybrid or plug-in hybrid option at this time. And if you're thinking about towing, don't think about the CX-30. Only the CX-50 is rated by Mazda to tow anything, and that is 2,000 pounds with a naturally aspirated engine and up to 3,500 pounds, as you see it here. The CX-30 is pretty tight. 20 cubic feet behind here compared to 31 in the CX-50. And when folded, 45 cubic feet, 56 over here. There's also some benefits with the CX-50. More light, an extra one here on the top hatch, and also levers to fold down the back seat. Whereas in the CX-30, you gotta really dig your hand in there or open the back door. It's cozier inside a CX-30, and particularly when you look this way. The pillars and just this shoulder line are so much higher and more intrusive in this car, and that makes seeing out of it more difficult. It also makes getting in and out harder as well. While it's limited on space, the CX-30 has a more enveloping cabin. Just look at how this brown material from the doors goes right into the dash, swoops over. It's a sportier vibe inside here versus that rugged, tougher look of the CX-50. But the same great construction remains. Even though this is the cheaper Mazda, it doesn't feel cheaper inside. The seats are just as comfortable as the CX-50, a little bit more so because there's not that ribbing in the middle that looks all sporty in that car. Here it's just all function. However, for the passenger, it's manual, even on the top trim. What's really comforting here are not the seats, because they're roughly the same quality as the CX-30, but the CX-50 has windows that I can see out of in every direction. The CX-50 allows you some extra amenities, like cooled front seats, a panoramic moonroof, and some plusher materials on the dashboard, especially this crosshatch design. But otherwise, it's the same high-quality construction you're used to in these top Mazda trims. Aside from some extra stitching and slightly different air vents, you wouldn't really tell that this was the 50 versus the 30 because the screens, the instrument panel, and basically everything else you're looking at and touching is almost identical. Obviously, this is the tighter car, and I would not want to be seated back here for more than 10 minutes. There's also no USB ports, no heated rear seats, and this is the top trim. But what it does have, rear side airbags mounted at the thorax level, plus rear seatbelt pretensioners and force limiters. That type of technology is usually only used at the front, and likely to get better crash test ratings, Mazda had to go this route to achieve it. And the CX-30 does have the higher crash test ratings from the IIHS. It gets a top safety pick plus versus just the regular top safety pick of the CX-50. Both cars, though, they both have front knee airbags. The main difference, the CX-50 is habitable back here. You can move about the cabin and not really feel like you want to leave immediately out of emergency. So, besides that, heated rear outboard seats and USB ports. You can't find those in the CX-30. I'm in the CX-50, but what you see here is exactly what's in the CX-30. These top trims both have a 10.3-inch screen. It's standard in the CX-50, it's optional in the CX-30, and they both work the same way, except it's not a touchscreen, unless you're using the wireless Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. But in either car, it's so far away from the driver's seat that you have to hunch over, and a lot of the functionality, such as Google Maps, swiping around, things like that, are not available. On the move, this makes for a very distracting setup. I don't like it, and the fact that it's 2024 and Mazda has not upgraded it in probably what seems like a decade now, I think they really need to overhaul it. But when you do get used to it, you'll find plenty of settings to adjust. Head-up displays, the digital dash, the Bose stereo systems with all the surround modes, plus tons of vehicle settings. For example, things like this. Occupant comfort, it works just like Lexus, where it can adjust the heated steering wheel, the passenger seat, and the driver's seat to the automatic climate control. And there's other features like all the safety settings you can adjust. Great 360 cameras, very clear. So all the technology is here, it just needs to be bundled and wrapped in a better package. This is the CX-50's instrument panel, and it looks basically the same as the CX-30. A digital center screen for that speedometer, which you can see some limited information, such as the driver assist. And I do like the analog gauges. You don't see that in cars anymore, but I do wish that this had some more functionality. Mazda has a new fully digital instrument panel on the new CX-70. You should check out that preview. But as it stands, this is very simple to use, and I do like the fact that it's easy to use, unlike the screen. Unlike most small SUVs in this segment that have very small four-cylinder engines, this one has a large one, a 2.5-liter turbo, just like the CX-50. And in a small SUV, this thing kind of rockets, it does. So really in a straight line, both these cars feel very similar. And what doesn't change is how planted the CX-30 feels, just as much as the CX-50. For a small car, it just has great road holding. It absolutely does. It's not swayed and knocked around by wind. At the same speeds, I'm finding that the CX-30, just to my ears, is a hair quieter. And I think a big part of that is the smaller wheels. These are 18 inches, narrower tires versus the 20s and wider tires that are on that CX-50. I think this is a better highway car for that alone, definitely is. Really, between these two SUVs, you're paying for a slight difference in style, right? That's very, very subjective. I prefer the CX-50. Inside, blink a little bit and you don't really know which car you're in. They're very, very similar, all the instrumentation. CX-30 does kind of cocoons you a little bit more. You're reminded that it is the slightly smaller Mazda, and when you go in the back seat, well, you know how much smaller it truly is. But from the front, driving for long distances, yeah, you can't drive as far at the smaller gas tank, so what, right? The actual experience in the driver's seat isn't compromised. Even at a lower price, the CX-30 has all of the same driver assist features, including a traffic jam assistant, including rear emergency braking, and so many things come standard, like adaptive cruise control. Mazda was doing this for years before other manufacturers really caught on. The CX-30 is a zippy little guy. It definitely is. And it handles well too. There's some noticeable roll though. It's a softer sprung car, and it rides well. It really does. But I think it trades off some of that really trademark Mazda suspension feel. And both these cars have a torsion beam rear suspension, so it's not fully independent. But to me, that's not really what makes or breaks the car. It's more the fact that this spring rate is just, I don't know, it's just a little plusher, and you might appreciate that. A bit more head toss from side to side. Really slightly, almost lazier steering in the CX-30. These are very slight differences, but from my perspective, I think the CX-50 has a better suspension. This one, which is, it's lifted, right? It's lifted versus a Mazda 3 hatchback. I'm just kind of feeling some of that height. And for a small car, I don't think I should have to feel all that. So for me, from an everyday perspective, it would be CX-50, maybe with smaller tires for less wind and tire noise on the highway. Other than that, the dynamics of both of these cars, pretty hard to beat. It's just fun. The brake pedal feel though is just as great as the CX-50, and these brake rotors are definitely smaller in size, smaller in weight, but in terms of stopping power, they both feel great. From my seat of the pants, it doesn't feel any faster or slower than a CX-30. And that tells me that this engine can handle cars with some heavy weight, because this is about 3,900 pounds. It's not a lightweight, really, considering the size of the car. And this moves along just fine, really does. Seat comfort's great. There's some considerable wind and tire noise, certainly more tire noise in the CX-50. These are wider tires, they're 20 inches. Even though they're not all-terrains or anything like that, it's just not the quietest cabin, especially I was expecting there to just be some more insulation, especially within the windows, to alleviate some of that, especially given that this is supposed to be the more expensive SUV by at least 2 model rungs, right? You get CX-30, CX-5, and then CX-50. Just occasionally, you can be at lower speeds and the 6-speed gearbox doesn't respond. It's just like the CX-30. There's some gaps in these ratios that sometimes leave you feeling like, hey, I'm not getting the full thrust. So I think Mazda, really does need to give us the higher gear ratios that you're seeing on the CX-90. They're probably a little ways from doing that. There's also supposed to be a hybrid version of this CX-50 coming out. We'll have to wait and see if that's any different. But it's not a big gripe. It really isn't. I think this really has the better ride and handling balance because it's not too firm either. I like it. And the steering is just perfect. As far as modern steering systems go, it's just so spot on. It really is. And the CX-50 being a few hundred pounds heavier doesn't really detract in terms of handling. It is the better handling SUV by far. It feels more planted. It doesn't lean as much. And for 2024, Mazda has given us new retuned dampers and a slightly different steering rack. Between the two, I think the steering, they're both great. They really are. But the suspension is better on the CX-50. I think because there's a slightly longer wheelbase, and even though these are 20-inch tires, it responds better. It's just more compliant, and it's more forgiving and under really any situation. Brakes are about the same, but really overall, this just feels like the sportier Mazda. power coming out of turns is really nice. If you like to drive, you're gonna like either of these cars, but I think just the way this car is set up with its suspension, yeah, this just feels more planted. It does. And I would have expected the CX-30 to be the car that would have been sprightlier feeling, more direct, because it weighs less, several hundred pounds, it's shorter. All of those things would make you believe that the smaller car would be the better handling car. But the CX-50 at these top trims, yeah, it's much better. Yeah, and the steering is just impeccable, like every Mazda. There's just enough road feel, it's very direct. Have a lot of fun in these cars. You don't have fun when you drive Foresters and RAV4s. The RAV4 hybrid maybe, but most of the cars in this segment are just kind of blah. Not even fun. You pay over $40,000 and it's just, okay, it's fine to commute in. But when you want to have a good time, either of these Mazdas is a pretty good ticket to it. The 2024 Mazda CX-30 starts at $24,995. The Turbo Premium Plus that I'm in, $38,770 as tested with destination. The 2024 CX-50 starts a bit more, $30,300 to start, and it's $45,125 as tested. Both of these cars have 8 trims in total, so there's a lot to choose from. If parking is a challenge and space is at a premium, the CX-30 is your better bet. But if you can afford the price premium of the CX-50, it's worth it. It's a better handling car, and it's not too much larger, yet it's so much more spacious inside. I also think it looks just a tad sharper. Now, what do you think? We've got plenty of other Mazda reviews. So if you want to see a CX-50 against a CX-5, we've got that. If you want to see a CX-5 against a CX-30, we also have that. And if you want to see this exact same model comparison from 2023, we have that too. Everything's on our YouTube channel, so subscribe, go to cargurus.com, and we'll see you next time.